But if you close your eyes,
we're going to take a look at is beauty and glamour lighting. There's lots of uses for this type of photography, not only from photographing business people or especially business women in somewhat glamorous type lighting or much more appealing style of lighting for a woman, or cosmetic ads, fashion spreads for magazines, and so on. So I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can create really a soft quality of light. You can then have some examples to go experiment and really define your own style. Generally, beauty lighting is used on women, and it's techniques that usually define or show the skin tones as being pretty flawless. So it's fairly low in contrast. A lot of this technique is done with not only flat or low contrast lighting, but also makeup has a lot to do with the beauty approach to lighting. Some photographers will use pretty contrasty light, while others will choose a much softer light quality. And it really depends on what you want to do yourself. The ratio between highlights and shadows is as much as 2:1, but a lot of times it's even down to 1.5:1, so very low contrast type lighting. So your approach to beauty lighting is going to depend on the particular light modifier you choose to use. And there's a whole bunch of different approaches here that all work and create different qualities of light. This example is a beauty dish on one of my white lighting. It's 22 inches and it's white on the inside. And it creates kind of a moderately contrasty light quality. You can place this right over your camera for a very straight on look, but generally people raise them up a little bit and go for the butterfly lighting pattern. Here's another example of a shoot-through umbrella. But what I really want you to take a look at is the white card she's holding under her face. This is the fill light, so to speak. And this technique is roughly close to what they call over-under technique, which in the last bunch of years has become clamshell lighting. You can have a shoot-through umbrella as seen here above, creating your key light, and then you can have another shoot-through umbrella below that creates the fill light. You can also use a white card like this, or you can use a disc reflector, and I'll show you a couple here. But if you look at her, the lighting is probably 2:1, maybe even closer to 3:1, using the card sitting on her lap. You would want to raise it up a little bit higher to get more fill coming in under the chin, under the nose, and so on. Okay, so here's two pictures showing a before and after. I started with a Rembrandt light pattern and no fill, and you can see on the left image here that it's really quite contrasty. In the right image, I turned on a fill light next to the camera and I set the ratio of 1.5:1. What I don't like is the shadow under her chin and the obvious wrinkles in her cheeks and so on. So I'm going to show you the steps I went through to get the image that I really liked. So the next step I took was to bring the key light closer to the camera and position it at about 5:30 on the lighting clock to really light the front of her face more fully. I still think the wrinkle next to the cheek is a little bit too strong, so by turning her face to the right a little bit, the shadow is reduced a little bit more. Here's the final photo. I went for the butterfly lighting pattern, and then I brought in a silver reflector on a reflector stand, and it's positioned just under her chest area so the camera can't see it, but a lot of that light is bouncing up under the chin and under the nose. Now here's another approach to clamshell lighting. And if you look at the eyes, you can barely see the catch lights from a light box above and a light box below. Here's a diagram that kind of gives you an idea of the clamshell lighting approach with two light boxes. The light box above is a half a stop higher in power than the light box below, and it creates kind of a key fill approach. But what's also really nice, if you look at the cheeks, they're starting to go into shadow a little bit, and this is really beautiful light quality. You can do this with light boxes, and again, you can do this with shoot-through umbrellas, one below and one above. So here's another approach using pretty much the clamshell over-under approach, but using a reflector again. I've got a silver white umbrella above, not a shoot-through this time, above the camera, creating almost a butterfly style pattern. But because her head's tipped, it's almost looking more like a Rembrandt or a loop lighting pattern. But you can see when it's right above the camera, the shadow from the nose goes straight down and makes it look kind of like a Rembrandt lighting pattern. But again, it's lots of highlight with minimal shadow, and it works really, really well. But what's different here than in previous examples is notice the silver reflector at the bottom of this picture. This is picking up a lot more light and bouncing it into the shadow areas. And silver reflectors will pick up much more light than that white card that was used in a previous example. So here's kind of the final image processed in somewhat of a high-key manner, just to show you how the end result really kind of looks. This diagram also shows you the over-under type approach to the lighting. Again, you can use beauty dishes like this diagram shows, you can use light boxes, you can use shoot-through umbrellas, and pretty much anything you want in developing your own style. Now I'm going to show you a different approach to beauty lighting. If you look at the picture here, you can see there's great highlight on the front of her face, and then it recedes into shadow. And this is very, very nice lighting for shaping the subject's face. If you look at the diagram now, you'll see two different lights. These are small strip lights that are placed right next to the camera, and they are basically pointed straight at her. Notice that there's no shadow under the nose, there's no shadow under the chin, but there's nice light that's bright in the center of her face and graduates off to the side of the face. And the shadowing really is on each side of the nose. And so it's really quite lovely. So again, two strip lights, one on each side of the camera, and you can see the reflections in her eyes, and then a white reflector underneath to kind of bounce light up under the chin. So again, another really nice approach to beauty lighting. Now, one of my favorite ways to light is to use a Octa Dome. And here's a picture of what an Octa Dome looks like. My Octa Dome is 7 feet. That's huge. That's bigger than me. If it's touching the floor, it's still going to be taller than I am. And this big, giant light source creates very beautiful, soft lighting. Now, if you look at the model here, you can see the same thing. She looks fabulous. Again, the light is centered on her face, but it's graduating off to each side to create shadow, but in a very, very low contrast and subtle way. It's beautiful. So here's the diagram. I put this behind the camera, and then there's a reflector underneath her to make sure that the shadows under her chin are filled in nicely. Now here is an excellent example of beauty lighting, and this is not my photograph. This comes from a former student of mine, Leanne Martin, who took this class, and she basically created this photograph, and I thought it was so fabulous I asked her if I could show it. What she did is she's using 2 Eclipse brand umbrellas, both on camera right, and one is below and one is above. It is essentially the clamshell or over-under approach. The top Eclipse umbrella is set at f11 and the bottom is set at f8.5, which I think is technically f9 to f10, somewhere in there. Then she placed a rectangular reflector under the model right in front, just a little bit above her waist. For the most part, that's bouncing in fabulous fill light to fill in the shadows and keep them from getting too dark. She also happened to use a colored gel on the background light, which is a light positioned directly behind the model, creating that nice blue glow that's a little bit brighter right above the shoulders than at the top of the photograph. Very nice photograph. Okay, on the last examples of beauty lighting, I am again creating over-under or clamshell lighting. This happens to be a Czech supermodel named Lunka, who lives in Dubai. Been there several times and happened to photograph her during the Gulf Photo Plus event with my workshop participants. And again, we used the over-under, and I started with the lights positioned at about 5 o'clock next to the camera, and set again with a half a stop difference between highlights and shadows. This is one of the first photographs, and it happens to be my absolute favorite. Look at her face. Nice highlight on the side of her face, and beautiful shadows on the side that really show her features. It looks great. Then there was also a background light hitting that canvas background back there. Lanka was moving quite a bit into different positions, and so in some cases I wanted to be sure and adjust my lights to keep up with her. In this picture we turned off the background light, but I don't like it as much. It's all light on her face more than anything. And again, the lighting on her is good, but I think the added detail in the background works much better. Then in this example, she's straight to the camera, so we moved the key and fill light literally as close to the camera as we could, and maybe even above and below the camera a little bit. So I would call this 545 on the lighting clock for the most part. And we also toned down the background light to be between the really bright example and then the really dark example that was just shown. She then started to move around in different positions, and this one looks pretty good, and then this one looks fabulous. Again, she's facing towards the key lights perfectly. And then she turned to the left of the camera, and I didn't move the lights in this case. Notice now that we have what's called broad lighting, mostly highlight on her face with a little bit of shadowing. And there was no fill reflector here, but there certainly could have been one on the left side of the camera, maybe lightening up those shadows a little bit. But again, it's a matter of taste. So this picture's okay, but when she tilted her head back a little bit and then rotated her head a little bit more towards the camera, the lighting began to work really good, creating that almost flat beauty lighting. But again, look at her cheeks. Absolutely fabulous. And this again has the light at about 545 above the camera and right below the camera in a half-stop difference. So there you go. That's an introduction to different ways you can do beauty lighting. And hopefully one of these techniques will accommodate your... One of the things that I think is so important for photographers, no matter what their specialty is to have a good imagination and to have the desire to explore and try new things and dig deep to create beautiful photography. And it doesn't really matter what you're interested in doing, whether it's portraits or landscapes or industrial or anything. It's always let your mind wander in trying to come up with ideas for photographs. And that's kind of what the purpose of this video is about. This is a portrait of my daughter. And I visited her at her house, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do other than I knew that I wanted to photograph her against a white background. And she lives in another city going to college, and so on a visit I had my gear with me and went over to her house to do some photography. And she has a basement with white walls and very low ceilings, about 7-foot ceilings. So it was really quite challenging to work in there. Now I'm going to show you the setup here in just a moment. But this is the photograph that I sort of abandoned. A lot of these things that we do are journeys. We don't really know when we're done. We don't know where the end is. We just know that we're satisfied or we're tired of trying different things. So we just stop and we abandon the image and we're happy with what we got. I shot a tremendous amount of photographs during this short session with her in her basement. And I got all kinds of ideas on what I'm going to do with them. This is the very first one that I processed and played around with. And I'm going to show you how I did it coming right up. Now the first thing is just to give you an idea of her basement. This is a terrible iPhone video. There is no room to work in here. There's a bed down there. I got my gear sitting on it. There's my lights and my stands kind of in a little hallway. And then as you turn around, that's the wall that I'm using right there where the cat is. You can see I got a light on the wall left, a light on the wall behind, and then another light on the wall here with my umbrella as the main light source. Let's look at that again. There's a light over here that's going to be bouncing off the wall, and then this is going to be the main light source, real frontal beauty lighting. This light's to bounce off the wall, and here we go again. This is the background light down here, and that's the light bouncing off the wall and also bouncing off the wall. So I'm creating a big, open, bright light source. And the whole point of me just even bringing that up is I shot this in a basement with a very low ceiling, very little bit of room, and I was able to do something like this. Plus, some other great images that I have yet to get done. So my point is, it's your imagination that's going to allow you to create spectacular photography, and in places you wouldn't normally think that you could do some good work. A big studio just is not that important. I've done a lot of stuff in a living room. I even travel a lot in my RV and do a little bit of shooting inside that from time to time. So that's the whole point of this video, is use your imagination and you can make amazing things happen. Okay, I'm going to show you a diagram now of the basement and where the lights were. You kind of saw the rough video, but now I'm going to show you the diagrams. Now if you look here, you can see the room's very small. I got an umbrella that's going to be my key light for pretty much straight on lighting when she's facing the camera. When she turns and faces at 45 degrees, I'll move that light over to 45 degrees. I'm using a large umbrella, about 36 inches. And then I have a light on a low floor stand on the background behind her to try to get the wall behind her to be as white as possible. Then I also have a light bouncing off the left wall to kind of act as a fill light and to bring the brightness level of the room up. And I have another light doing the same thing on the other wall to try to keep the brightness levels pretty bright. So that's the lighting setup. Now I'm going to show you all the images that I captured, and those are in Bridge. So let's go look at that. Okay, so here is what I photographed. She's basically wearing a tank top. I really wanted bare shoulders for the retouching, the skin softening part of the processing and stuff like that. So she's wearing a tank top, and it shows in a few pictures, and I'll retouch it out if it's in the way. But I shot straight on. Now, if you look at the light quality here, you can see there's some shadowing going on around here a little bit, and that's from that one big light umbrella. You can see the background doesn't have the wall perfectly white, but it does have it light gray, so that'll be easier to retouch. Then she moved to 45-degree angle, and I moved the key light this direction so that I would get some shadowing going on here, a little bit of shadowing from the nose. I couldn't get the key light up any higher to create a really good loop lighting pattern, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. And for the most part, I was going for a pretty soft beauty lighting approach. Now you can see that I had her tilt her head, chin up, chin down. It's a process I go through with every single person I photograph. Chin up, chin down, head tilt, no head tilt. Got some smiles. Okay, then she's just facing the other direction, not looking at me. I don't know what I'm going to use these for, but I'm going to definitely keep them in the files for when an idea hits me. I have sort of these photographs that I can do something with. Then the hand on the shoulder, trying a couple different things, looking back at the camera but not moving. I really like this type of pose. I'll have to retouch out the tank top or the tube top, but I like this type of pose a lot. And let's see what else we got here. Some with smiles, tilting her head, grabbing her hair. Again, when the idea hits me, I'm going to come back and look at these images and pick some things out. There's not really any change in lighting going on here. The key light is still over here. See that little highlight right there? That's coming off the left wall to the left of the camera that I'm bouncing light off. And that's exactly what I want. Fill light and some little sort of diffused highlights on her back. Okay, then I had her change position, and now that light bouncing off the wall is creating this highlight right here on the front of her. Whoops. Creating that highlight on the front of her. And that's good. And then now the light next to the camera, or the big umbrella, is creating a fill light source. Again, changing position a little bit, trying some different things, smiles. Then we're going for the profile. Now I've turned down the umbrella light a lot and using that bounce light as a key light. So here again, think about this. There's only one umbrella, four strobes, I'm sorry, creating this whole image. You could do this with flashes. Okay, then I had an idea of superimposing an object here. I don't know what it is, a bubble, a globe, a glowing orb. I haven't figured that out yet. Okay, same thing here. Again, I don't know what I'm going to be doing with these, but I wanted some variety. Then she's blowing something out of her hand. I don't know what it is. Could be dandelions or flowers or soap bubbles. And okay, don't know what this one was for. I don't know what I was thinking, but you never know. Then her cat came in and she wanted a couple shots with her cat. Okay, now we're playing around trying some different stuff. This all took place in about an hour and a half. Yelling into her hand. Again, I don't know what the idea is, but we'll see. Getting in close, wider angle. Okay, now a little bit of hair down in the face. The sliver of face. You know, again, she's in this phase where she's streaking her hair blue. Basically the same lighting setup. I'm only adjusting the umbrella as needed to make sure the light that's hitting the front of her is perfect. I really like this a lot. Kind of more inquisitive. Okay, bad girl here. Straight to the camera again, and that's it. So that's the series I shot in about an hour and a half. She's sitting on a bucket because the ceiling's so low that I needed her down low. I'm down on my knee. And anyway, that gives you an idea of a photo shoot in a basement. Again, here's bouncing my strobe off the wall and so on. Let's see. And then here's just another perspective showing the same thing. She's sitting right here. I am over here with the camera to the left. This light was moved over here, bouncing off the wall. This is behind her, bouncing off the wall. And the other light right next to me. Anyway, let's go take a look at processing now. Okay, so I opened up the RAW file in Adobe Camera Raw, and I didn't do hardly anything to it because I prefer to do it all in multiple layers in Photoshop. So this is the RAW file. And as you can see, the background's a little grayer over here, a little whiter over here. So this is my layer stack with all the things that I did in the first processing of this image. And the first thing I wanted to do was knock out the background, which I did right here. And so here is what the mask looks like that I did. Now, the way that I do this, and I'll show you how I do it, I'm going to duplicate this layer. And this is the same process I would use to, or same process I did use. Okay, I use the quick selection tool in Photoshop. And I basically come in here and do a quick drag around, all the way around, even getting into the hair there a little bit. Now, one of the things that you want to do when you are extracting somebody from a background and their hair, if you look close here, you can see all these hairs. Now, in some cases, this is going to be really important that you keep all this. In other cases, it's not going to matter so much, and it really depends on what you're doing. So you want to just be careful that you only capture as much as you need in this first selection process. For example, you can see the background through the hair here. So I don't want that selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in, select the Lasso Tool, and I'll hold down the Alt Option key to deselect that. So I'm going to go in here and I'm staying right along the edge. And I'm going to go all the way around just to make sure I don't blow it on her hair. And then I'm going to come around and I've deselected that area. I don't think I'm going to have a problem over here because it's so close, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to come around, and when I say so close, it's what I really mean by that is that there's really a straight edge of hair here with just a few little hairs sticking out. Not going to be that big of a deal. So the next thing is to add a mask. Okay, and as you can see, it added a mask, and it looks like she's been cut out with a pair of scissors in the first grade classroom. So what we're going to do is enable that mask again, and I'm going to double click on it, come over, and I'm going to select Mask Edge. And you want to use this right here, this edge detection part right here. So it's ready to go. I'm only going to go back in and reselect. I'm sorry, I'm going back in and brushing the areas that I sort of left out, and I'm going to let Photoshop go in and find all of those hairs, and it did. So let's OK that, and okay, now I'm going to use the zoom tool and go in, and I am going to turn that off, and as you can see, it really did a good job coming around here. Let's look at the mask again. Okay, there's a few little things here going on, but that's okay, and I'll show you what the deal is going to be with those. I'll enable the mask again. So what's happened is, because this area right here is about 50% mask, not totally transparent, it's only showing the hair through a little bit. So we have to fix that. There's a little bit of that going on up here, as you can see the checkerboard pattern through the hair. So you really want to be careful. This area I'm not going to worry about. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and I'm going to select my brush tool, and I'm going to use white as my foreground color. I'm going to reduce the size of the brush with the bracket keys, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to paint white at 99%. Whoop, I went over the line. Just like coloring in first grade. Don't go over the line. And I'm coming back in. There's no hair fibers really obviously showing, and so I'm basically erasing this part of the mask and leaving where the areas where the hairs are selected, right along in here, but not where the hair is really, really dense. And this part right here, there's no reason for this to be selected. So I'm basically cleaning up the mask. And there's a little bit of edge right in there. We'll get that. Come down the other side. No reason to let Photoshop mask those areas out, because her hair is very dense and very dark. Clean that up as well. That right in there. Okay, nothing down below. So, okay, we're going to leave that right there. Okay, so now I have selected the head with all the hair, individual hairs, and I think everything looks good. Notice the difference down here. It's all there now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer. Now, adding a curves adjustment layer is what I'm going to do to make the background go white. Because as you can see, it's gray. I want it to go white. And I'm going to use the mask that I just created right here, this one, to basically fix that for me as far as make the white background by masking her out while I adjust the brightness of the background. So the way you do that is you hold down the Alt or Option key and you drag the mask up. Replace layer mask. Now the mask was already there. As you can see, the mask was already there, but I'm showing you the steps. Now, normally you wouldn't see this because of the corrections that I made, but you click on this mask and you come over here and you hit invert, okay? Here's the curves. Notice how much I brightened the white background by dragging this up. I drug it up quite a bit to make the background white. And yet she remains the same because this mask is blocking anything from happening to her. So, that's exactly what you want to happen. That's why I created this mask around her. Then I drug it up on to replace the mask that was on the curves adjustment layer, and then I inverted it so that it only is affecting the background behind her, and that's it. Okay, so that's how I knocked out the white background behind her. The next thing I did is I created a Hue Saturation Layer. So watch her hair here. I wanted that blue hair. She's into tinting her blue hair right now. And the lips. I wanted a little bit more saturation. There's what my hue saturation looks like. Up about 30%, which is really quite a lot. Then I also added a curves adjustment layer. Let's click on that. And I wanted more blue in her hair. Now I go back in and I make that, I kind of bring that brightness level down a little bit later on. Here's what the mask looks like. So I go in, I select the blue channel, meaning I'm adding blue. See, I'm taking blue away, I'm adding blue. So I wanted to add some more blue by selecting the blue channel. Then I go back to RGB and I could brighten or darken whatever I'm doing here, but I don't need to do that. Then I add a hide all mask, or an adjustment layer comes with a mask, so I filled it with black. And that is done by going to Edit, Fill, and if your foreground color is black, great. If not, just select black. So that's how I filled that adjustment layer, with black. Then I go in and I just use a brush, the paintbrush, with a white selected as the foreground color, and I go in and I paint white on the black, which is sort of acting like an eraser, and to make that blue stand out a little bit more. So that's what I did for the initial processing of the image. Then I saved it as a TIFF, and I took it into Portrait Professional skin softening or portrait retouching software, which I love. Now I'm going to show that to you next. Okay, so I've opened up Portrait Professional, and now I'm going to take that TIFF file and I'm going to go ahead and open that up to do some work on it. And it's going to be this image right here. That's the one we just did in Photoshop. So we'll open that up. And here is basically what you're going to get on the screen. And I'll show you these initial steps before we go into processing. Okay, it's a female. So as you can see here, here's your instructions. You're going to set some points on the eyes. So this is how Portrait Professional determines which areas it's going to adjust with the sliders that you're going to find later. So you basically just move these anchor points around, various spots. And as you go left, it allows you to do different shapes. So you just want to kind of get it as best you can there in the corner of the eye and in the corner of the eye here. Drag it down a little bit to the end of the eyelid. Same thing. And you can move around the pupil and the iris here. So anchor those. All right. And then you hit the space bar and it takes you to the next eye. So I'm going to go in. It's a little bit tougher because of the angle. The shape of the eye is different than the eye we just looked at. Okay, we'll line all of this up as best we can. You can shrink by grabbing these anchor points and pulling them out a little bit. Okay, and then we'll finish the eyebrow over here. And let's see here. All right, it's not going to... I needed to go the other way. All right, let's do that. Okay, now the reason these are selected is because you can change the color, you can change the sharpness on them, and so on. Spacebar again. Now, is the mouth open or closed? In this case, it's closed, so there's only one bar in the middle. So we'll pull this over to try to get the lips. Come down, go up a little, come over here. This line needs to be right in the middle where the lips are. Okay, and then we'll finish the nose. The nose is pretty centered there, but this goes on the side of the nose. This kind of goes at the very bottom of the nose, and the opposite side. All right, now select the face so that you're not doing any retouching on the hair by pulling in the anchor points here, fine-tuning those. There isn't one over here. Maybe up a little higher. That one's good. All right, now it's processing, and it's going to take us into the area where we can do the reconstruction of the face, or not reconstruction, but sculpting of the face, changing the shape of it. So here we go. Okay, so I opened up that TIFF file that I just did in Photoshop. This is it right here, where I exaggerated the blue, exaggerated the lips a little bit, brightened it up, knocked out the background, and so on. And then I brought it into Portrait Professional. This is a great software program, and I have been using it ever since it came out. Instead of doing my retouching in Photoshop, I prefer to do it in Portrait Professional. This is the before, and this is the after. You can look how smooth the skin is. The eyes are brightened up. There's a little tiny bit of structural changes, like the mouth's a little bit smaller, and other things with that Portrait Professional sort of does naturally. You're going to have to go in and decide if you want to do any facial adjustment, and I'll show that to you. Okay, so this is the before. Now, Portrait Professional will do a basic adjustment. In other words, this is what the program created, this look for the most part, and I go in and fine-tune it. I really never have to go in and start from scratch because the program does an amazing job. So let's take a look at what everything that comes with this program. So I'm going to shut these down. Okay, the first thing is the face sculpting. It's going to shorten the jaw, shrink the mouth a little bit. You know, it might do all kinds of different things. I'm going to turn it on and off and watch the face right here. Okay, it made some changes. Why it thinks it needs to do that, I don't really know. But most of the time, I don't like what it did because I'm dealing with clients and I don't really want to change them too much. But sometimes I leave it in there. I think this looks great compared to this one. So I'm going to leave the default settings for the sculpting controls as is. Now, I'll show you here what you can do a little bit with these different settings. It chose 48. I'm going to leave it there, but I'm going to show you. Notice how the face shape is changing? It's pretty amazing. Okay, but you can just deal with the head, changing the shape of the head. I'm going to leave it at what it chose. And the same thing, you can make the neck longer or shorter and so on. You can open eyes more. You can open just the left eye more for people whose eyes don't open the same. In fact, her right eye is appears to be a little shorter than the other one. So let's see what happens when I open it up. Okay. Whoop, wrong right eye. So let's go with the left eye. Her left eye, not mine. Okay. Wow, that's quite a bit different, but I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to leave it as it is. You can change the eyebrow shape, the shape of the mouth, and so on. But again, I like what it did, so I'm going to leave that. What I think is the really powerful part of Portrait Professional is the skin softening. So again, these are the default settings. It's at 38, but let me turn it off. See, now it's the same as this for the most part. But you can go all the way up and you can create what I call plastic face or mannequin face. Believe it or not, people who use this program actually create portraits that look like this, and that to me is a big mistake, and because it just doesn't look real. So I like it right about its default settings. You can also increase or decrease the sensitivity. That's going to have an overall effect. But again, when it comes out with its default settings, I just go in and do a little tiny bit of fine tuning, and I'm very happy with that. So I'll blow it up a little bigger. You can see how smooth the skin is, gets rid of the pores, and so on. And it's absolutely amazing. So I go in, make some changes, and pretty much fine-tune what it picks as the default settings. Let me see if I can get this just right. That's it for skin controls. Now, what I did do that Portrait Professional didn't is I whitened the eyes a little bit more, or I did a master fade, made it a little bit brighter on the eyes, and specifically in the pupils here, I opened them up a little bit, or let's see, brightened iris into 36 here. Just want a little more pop coming out of the eyes. But again, look at all these different controls that you have. Most of the time, I just don't find that I need all of that, but it's really cool that it's here. And the other thing I do, let's go down in size here a little bit and raise this up. Now, when it does its skin smoothing, let me find that skin controls here. You can show the skin area. The purple area is where it selected the skin. And that, for the most part, doesn't select down here. In fact, there's a spot missing right there. You can kind of see through that it didn't select that skin. So you can extend it and then brush right on there and extend. Or you can cut back. You know, if you don't want the skin softening to affect an area, you cut back. If it missed an area, you add, and it always misses some areas in the face and on the side of the face and so on. So I go ahead and extend it, then I do that, and that way the skin smoothing that's up here is down here as well. Notice that she has a mole here. Okay, that's gone, and I didn't do that. So, all right, for this image, I went in and I did that, and then I went right up to next, and I save it as a TIFF. So that's how I used Portrait Professional to basically smooth the skin and get this real nice dream glow look to the face. And now we're going to go back into Photoshop and do some more. When I save the image in Portrait Professional back to the file with all the images, it saves it with the same image number with a PP at the end of it standing for Portrait Professional. That's the image I want to open in Photoshop. So we'll go ahead and open that with Photoshop CC, and There is our image. Okay, now we're ready to go. So I'm going to jump over to the finished image now and sort of show you the process I went through to get here. There's the same image, the base image as it is. What I ended up doing was quite a bit of retouching here. So let's take a look at that. One of the things I didn't really like was the hair sticking out here, and so it was very stiff because of this coloring that she puts in her hair, and I wanted to move that in a little bit. So I ended up going in and creating a background layer to start, and this is it right here. What I ended up doing was going in with the Lasso Tool and drawing a line around it right here, and then basically copying that and moving it in a little bit. And then this is the next layer. I went in and adding a mask to it, I went in and I just brushed in the section of hair that was moved a little bit. And that's how I sort of painted, you might say, the other hair on top of this hair, and that's how I ended up with basically filling in that gap and shortening it up a little bit, and I think it looks better. So let's look at that on and off. So for the most part, I copied and pasted is a good way to look at it. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was a burn and dodge on the face. So let's bring this up bigger. And let's turn the burn layer on and off. Okay, see the areas in here, along the cheek, a bridge of the nose, and so on. Burn and dodge. Just to shape the face a little bit more. The way that you do this is you add a curves adjustment layer, which is what I did here. This is the layer. I darkened the layer. By pulling down the curve, I darken the face. Then I add a hide all mask, or I fill the mask that the curve layer came with black. And I go in and I just paint very softly with a brush at a very low opacity. I'm sorry, a very low flow. I did have a very low flow. Here it's at 100. I was down about 3 at 99%. And I very slowly, in multiple steps, brush on there to darken those areas. And you can see what's going on. Okay? The next thing is I wanted to dodge, and it's just the opposite. Another layer. Let's turn off this mask. There's the curve. I raise the curve the opposite direction to really brighten up the face. But once I add the hide all mask, you don't see that curves adjustment anymore. You don't see that it's brighter. So what you do is you go in and you paint on the areas you want to be brighter, or the areas you want to dodge. Right in here, a little bit of the chin, up the bridge of the nose, and so on. So for the most part, that is how I sort of sculpted the face a little bit more for contrast. Okay, the next thing I did is then I started getting crazy. I really like this. In fact, this would work good just on its own. This is simply a curves adjustment layer added. And by the way, if you don't know how to add a curves adjustment layer, right here, create new fill or adjustment layer, curves. Okay, then you can go in and do all you want. I'm going to Control Z to get rid of that. Now, there's a few pre-selects on the curves panel here. I chose cross processing, and that's how I got green hair, saturated blue, and so on. And I also then really brightened it up, but it really made the colors go wild, and I love that. Then I went in and I really started brightening things up, and I was up about right there. Is where I was. Okay, that creates sort of a bleached skin look. So let's blow that up big. See, I just think that looks fabulous. And again, keep in mind, this is a journey that I'm on. I am experimenting, I am exploring, I am trying new things. I'm trying to go where I've never gone before. That's how it works. So, okay, so I'm pretty much done with her. I think she looks great the way that it is. So then I decided to add some dots in the background, and that's what you're going to see right here in these circles on the background, which are very diffused at this point. So I went in and added some circles by basically going in and doing a elliptical marquee tool, holding down the shift key to make it stay perfectly circular, making a circle there, clicking on the foreground color, coming up, picking a color. Okay? Now, I just selected orange as my foreground color. Let me make this a little bit brighter so you can see the circular dots that I had in here. Okay, the way that I did that again is I made the circle. I'd select different colors. I go to Edit. I'm on the wrong... Oh, I have to create a layer. That's why it's not showing up. So let's just create a new layer in here for the demonstration. All right, layer 6 is going to be the layer for the dot. Okay, I go in and I hit Fill with the foreground color. Now it's orange. Now I Control D to deselect it, and I went up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I've been using somewhere up in here, kind of right about in there is where I start, somewhere right in there. Yeah, okay, and I leave that. Then I can come back in and I can lower the opacity to make it not so strong and obvious. Okay, so there's one orange one. Then I came down, I drug it down here. Now I created a duplicate of that orange one. So hit the letter V for the Move tool, and I would move these circles around. I did the same thing with green and pastel blue and pastel pink, pastel yellow. And I created all these circles of color, and I diffused them. Okay? So that is how I ended up getting the background behind her like that. Now, as I was working on this, I kept thinking, oh, the colors are too bright, or they're too sharp, or they're too obvious. I want less obvious. So I played around with it for a little while, and I tried a couple different things. But for the most part, that's how I created the picture of her. I created the color dots. I also duplicated this entire group. This is a group here, by the way. You select all the layers that you've created, and you go up and you say New Group from Layers. That'll be a new group from the layers that you selected. And that happens to be all the dots. And then I decided I was going to try some other things with the dots, so I drugged this down to a Create New Layer. Now I had another set of dots. And by the way, look how bright they got. Because now there's 3 layers of dots on top of each other. I'm going to Control Z that because I don't need it. So I had 2 groups of dots, and I played around with different blur and streaking techniques with each group to see what I liked better. When I felt like I was there, I hit Shift, Control, Alt, or if you're on the Mac, Shift, Control, Option, and the letter E. That takes all these layers and compresses them into one layer right here. So now I can turn all these off, and I still have my layer, even though the opacity's down. There's the image. That's where I stopped when I thought that I liked all the color behind her. Okay? So that's how I created the dot, the pastel color behind, the bleached skin, the saturated blue in her hair. Then I wanted to try one more thing. So I drug this down and I copied it. And then I turned off the first one. And of course, I'm going to delete the one I just made because it happens to be this one here that I want to show you. Okay? Actually, I needed them both. Sorry about that. I needed both layers because this one, as you can see, has some things going on, and I'm going to explain that. What I ended up doing with this layer on top, and I'm going to disable this mask to show you. Wrong. Okay, there we go. Is I went up to Filter, Blur, Motion Blur, and I created the angle I wanted the blur to go, and I really laid heavy into it. Let's take a look at it. Well, you can't even see it. It's just a blob, about 250 almost. And that blurs the image like a runner streaking by in one direction. Okay. And I wanted to do that to really blend these colors back here even more. So I created a motion blur. But then what I did is I added a mask, and I started painting on the mask to bring the sharpness of her face back through. So let's take a look at that. Okay? Here's the blur is still showing, but let me disable that mask. And you can see that she's blurring. But by painting on the mask black, I'm hiding the blur in the areas that I want to keep sharp. And it was really strong out here in the hair. I left the blur back here, but I really liked the blur that it gave down here on the neck and the shoulders. So I liked that a lot, and I left it. But I definitely didn't want blur on the face and the lips and most of this area to stay pretty sharp. So that's the reason that I added a mask, a see-all mask, but then I go and I select black as a foreground color and I paint on here, which is actually showing up on the mask, to block the blur from the face. So the blur only stays out here. So there you go. That is pretty much it. That's the final image that I settled on. Very, very subtle pastel, very bleached skin that's been smoothed, very nice. Little burning and dodging to darken and lighten areas, although that's been a little bit erased, so to speak, from the bleaching and so on. But that's how I created this sort of blur creative picture portrait of my daughter. Keep in mind, in summary here, this was shot in a basement, but my point is really to emphasize that you don't need a big studio to do some amazing things. You can do this in your garage, you can do these in your living room and all that sort of thing, and then you can just open the image on Photoshop and start playing until you make magic. So there you go. Okay, now just go shoot.
But if you close your eyes